There's 100 revisions that are going on. Now you got to design them a logo and, all this other graphic stuff. And like, what is that worth? Because worst case scenario, that's what's going to happen. What's up? My name is Devon. This is my co-host, Mitch Harley. Welcome to another installment of the Perspective Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about networking, self-development, how to bring value, how to build value, how to go deep rather than go wide, and how that's all going to wrap up into a nice package that will improve you in all areas of your life, but most importantly in living a fulfilling life, doing something meaningful that will leave an impact when you're gone.
Because you talk to most podcasters, like, they have a very different vision of where they're going or where they are, or where they think they could go.
Right.
Like, it's not to them. It's not that it's not a reality. I don't think that everyone has a limiting belief, but they're more kind of like trying to figure it out, and like
not necessarily a limiting belief, content. Just a limited set of knowledge when it comes to the practical application of the podcast.
Yeah,
like, cool. I see it. I get how, camera, microphone, I get how it kind of works, but to what end? What is the purpose of it? Why does it exist?
And who are you trying to get in front of? Like, when I tell people, yeah, we're international, we literally are. We are international. And that's not just Canada, the States. We are worldwide. We're like the pit bulls of podcasting. And, a lot of people look at that and they don't fully grasp what that is. And some people are like, man, I could never go international. Why? All it took was getting the right guests. Now all of a sudden your podcast is being shared, over there. Well, now you're literally, by definition, you're international. Doesn't mean you're flying around the world, but we are connecting with people internationally, and we're not just trying to get our friends and family to watch our podcast because they don't care. Sorry, they want us to succeed, but they don't care. Right?
It's because small town thinking, though.
Yeah, it doesn't affect them as much as my dad wants me to do well. What we talk about, there's only a percentage that he would actually benefit from, in a sense, and find application from. And so is he going to sit there and listen to my podcast for any other reason than it's me? Nope. And I wouldn't either if I were him. Like, that's not a knock on him. But lots of people are like, oh, I need all my friends. Like, I have like 100 friends. So that should be 100 subscribers. It's not how it works.
This is musicians, bro. Everybody thinks that if they're, 30 friends shared their music every time they posted it, that they're inevitably going to get famous. And it's that, I call it the small town mentality, because they're trapped in this tiny little bubble of having to serve a very small local community. The idea of, and I hear this a lot, and it's just idiots recycling stupid information. You got to make it in your own city before you can make it somewhere else. That is not how it works. You got to find people you can serve with the thing you serve them with. And it doesn't matter where they are, as long as you can serve them. So for somebody like Cam, why does he still have a podcast? It's not because the podcast makes him millions of dollars. It's because the podcast gets him in front of people that will pay him $1 million. Mm-hmm. And there's a big difference between that. I know they almost sound the same, but there's a distinction that needs to be made. If he can sit down with a CEO of, some big major towers downtown and have a conversation about something of value with them, and then help that person in some way get in front of a bigger audience, develop their personal brand or whatever. And then later, when that CEO of the buildings is like, I need somebody to do some parking lot work, I got a guy. Now Cam just got a $400,000 deal because he's got 10 buildings. Uh-huh. It's not about the 500 viewers that you have. It's about the quality or the depth of those people, and the people like what you and I are going to do in terms of how we're shifting the podcast and acquiring guests. It's like, we're not necessarily talking to these guests because of any other reason. And we think that there's some value there that can be shared into a network of people that we can build with. That community now exchanges things. Somebody needs something that I'm good at. Cool, I'm here. Somebody needs something that Mitch is good at. Cool, he's there. I need something that my guest was good at. Like if I'm talking to somebody who is trying to do videos for sales and they can't speak properly, I'm calling up Cynthia and saying, look, I got a client for you. I need you to improve this so that we can improve their sales funnel. So now they're doing a vocal coaching program with Cynthia, and then they come back to me. Now they can deliver on the thing that I'm trying to help them with. Right. And so that network is where the real value is. It's not in the 15 viewers that watch that podcast on Spotify. It's in how we can solve problems inside of that community.
Yeah. No, and I think going into the podcast, we had, maybe I shouldn't say we, but me, like I had kind of that perception that we need to get big on Spotify. We need to get big on YouTube. And that's what's going to draw people in. But we've drawn people in not because of that.
Right. It's not an either or situation.
Because of us.
It's an and. Yeah, we need 1 million followers, because that would be amazing to have 1 million people that would want our services. But also we can get clients at the level that we're at too.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that. And I mean, it's like we talked about before, it's been a journey. I think even just for me, expanding my understanding of how networking works. To me, the basics of network are tapping into as many people as you possibly can. But that's what I've learned is almost kind of a rookie view of networking.
Right.
Because in a sense, you go on a social media platform, if somebody has 1 million followers, that's networking. You have 1 million people that have connected to your content. But is it truly beneficial networking? Because real networking is me being able to pick up my phone and text or phone somebody and say, hey, can you help me out with this problem? Or I got someone that I need you to help with. That is the actual how networking works. You know, being the guy. Hey, I need this. I need this service. Hey, I got a guy. That's networking. But when you look at somebody who has 1 million followers, do they have that? Or do they just have 100 followers, 1 million followers because they are really good at dancing? I don't know. I'm not a knock on people that dance on TikTok, but is that really networking? And so for a business individual that is trying to grow and trying to expand, especially into new markets, you need a network. And you need a working network. I think that's the power of networking that people, Kevin O'Leary is a really good example of this. Him and Damon Jones made the same comment, or Damien Jones made a similar comment, where going to university, they were like, is the most useless thing they ever had. They don't remember anything from like 3 things that they could have Googled really were beneficial for them. But he's like, but you know what I got out of university? Networking. Because the people I went to school with, he's like, one of them is now a CEO of a major bank. So when I need something, I call my buddy. It's not because I was a big customer at the bank and I moved up the ladder. It's like, no, I knew the guy that got the job. And then that just continues on and continues on when you go to the right school. So do I think going to university has value? Academically, not as much, but I do respect the fact that he acknowledged, I think Mark Cuban made a similar comment too, like the people that he has in his working network were from university.
You don't go to Harvard to get an education. You go to Harvard to meet the other people at Harvard.
Yeah, that are
because
going
they're
places.
higher level achievers. And that there's some qualifications, like the ROI on the education, I would argue, is significantly less. I did the math on this the other day because of that negative comment that we had on one of our posts. And I was looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, what is my investment then in becoming a lawyer? It's 8 years of schooling. And in Canada, it's the equivalent of about $175,000 of an investment into education. Now, is there a need for lawyers? Yeah, absolutely. And do they need some education? Absolutely. I don't disagree with that. But the ROI on it now is, how long is it going to take that person to pay off that $175,000 so that they become positive, net positive? So they're earning more money than it's cost them to get there.
And the 175 also doesn't include the expenses it takes to get the education. That right. 175 is education itself.
Yeah. So some quick math.
Survive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's even more to it. Right. But even on the surface level, if you were making $1,000 payments every month to your student loans, it's going to take you 17 years to pay that off. So you're halfway to retirement. If you work for 30 to 40 years as a lawyer, you're halfway to retirement before you're ROI positive. Now, granted, lawyers make a lot more money. So let's say we doubled that. You're still 9-10 years before you're making your money back.
And that's 10 years on top of the 8 years you put into school. So now you're 18 years before you're positive. You're still 18 years. You have to,
no matter
you have to
how
add
you
in
slice
8
it.
years on top of it, no matter what. So going back into the overpaid, are lawyers overpaid? I don't believe in that term. And I think that's where that post, it really set me back, because I was like, you're missing the point. You're arguing for people that make a lot of money. And I'm like, so am I. I'm not discrediting somebody that makes money. I'm saying even people that maybe aren't equaling the accountability of the service they're offering, right? Like, I'm even defending those people, let alone talking about people that
it was a
are
very
qualified.
amateur way of looking at it, because every CEO has a few friends and family that they can put into a job. I mean, my response to that is, well, yeah, I have friends and family that I would love to make rich, but are they qualified? Do they want to do that job? I'm not just going to give people money because they're my friend. First of all, that erodes away at their self-worth.
But if it does, let's just say you did. Let's say you had a friend that you're like, had a pack. I'm going to give him $1 million as soon as I can afford it, whether he sits at home or not. The argument in that video was, does that make him overpaid?
Right.
It doesn't. And he was arguing, he's like, not everyone who makes $500,000 is crap at their job. No, they're not. That's not what I said at all.
That's why they're getting paid $500,000.
That's why they're getting paid $500,000. But I'm also saying within that category of people that make a lot of money, there are people that probably don't do the equal amount of work.
I feel
that's
like
not their fault.
Right. I feel like some people just argue for the sake of arguing, and they don't even know to the end that they're arguing. He
took the sentence that I said, garbage at their job and make a lot of money. He took that sentence out of context and said, not everyone is garbage at their job. And I'm like, no, they're not. I'm saying even people who are garbage at their job. But you took it for face value. And then I looked at his account. He has like 9 followers. So he's obviously just a troll. So I'm like, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. But I was like, let's pretend somebody who was worthwhile of looking into their time and opinions said that. What would the response be? And so I'm really happy with how we responded. And I'm really happy with, the outcome of that, because literally the one negative comment that we've had over this whole year, I think that's like the only one. We might have had one other one, but for anything of value or some pointed, because he made 2 comments, like he was really invested in making that point. So that's cool. I mean, that's the whole point of this platform. But I'm really impressed with how we did it. And I think anyone else who looks at it, and we've had tons of positive feedback specifically about that post. I've had people call me and tell me, hey, I want to make sure you know that I really appreciated that post. The post we made after that, this one was interesting too. So we made a post about, so we made the bad managers post, and then we made this music in the office post, which people really responded to. And then we made the post about the being overpaid. But then I made the post about the personal brand, where the guy yelling at the hockey coach about his son, and then turns around and offers high quality service, or claims to, right? Is there a correlation? I had someone call me and be like, that was an eye opener for me. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, because that's me. I'm that person yelling. And I'm like, I know. It's not an attack on. Yeah. I'm like, it's not an attack on you. They're like, no, I'm literally saying, like, I have to reflect, could I start a business in my local town with my reputation? And it made me think. So they're like, yeah, you struck a nerve. But that person, my argument to them was, if you're mature enough to listen to that and say, how is this affecting me? Could I start a business in my own town? To me, you've already started changing that reputation. To me, you've already showed that maturity. And to me, I think you could start a business, especially if it's the people that are too immature to recognize that that's what they're doing, that they're self-sabotaging. That's the people that are going to look at that post and completely disagree.
Right.
So
it takes a level of accountability, right?
Absolutely, it does. So I find it interesting, the different reactions that we're receiving off social media posts. And I think lots of people just, Kobe's a really good example of somebody that looks into comments and looks into reactions and reads it correctly. I think a lot of people look at their post count and comments, and I don't think they take it into context properly. I
Right.
think they just focus on views or they just focus on likes. I don't care if people like our stuff. But what does it do? Right? Does it strike a nerve? Is it something you're going to come back to? Putting a like in is just acknowledging that you watched it and you agree with it. That's really all a like is. So to me, yes, it helps the algorithm, but I don't care about the likes.
Well, and this harkens back to your point about, 1 million followers is great, but to what end? Does it serve or no? And the argument that can be made here is that it's not about going wide. It's about going deep. And I know that that's something a lot of people have said a million times before me, and that's not new, groundbreaking, or revolutionary, but to take it now in context and realize, like, when somebody comments something, whether it's a shitty comment or not, being able to have a conversation with that person from a mature standpoint in pursuit of truth and transparency and honesty, that's the goal. I'm not here to attack the guy that said that he didn't agree with us. I'm here to be like, yeah, I think that you're right. I have tons of friends that I'd like to make millionaires, but I'm also going to make the argument that I don't think it's feasible just to give somebody money for no reason, just because you can. That's not safe for anybody. But that's on me. Right. And
that's on me who has the money. That's not on them.
Exactly.
And that was my whole point.
Yeah.
That got completely missed.
Right. If I'm making a hockey team and I find, Sidney Crosby and he's out here killing it, and I think adding him to my team is going to make my team win, I'm willing to put a dollar figure on that. And right now I know I have $100 million to play with. So I'll give him 20. And then I get a really good goalie and I'll also give him 20. Now I got to build the team around that. But that means I've already used up 40 million of my amount of money that I can use. So who has the next highest level of skill that I can bring into my team? And what's that worth? Right? Because it solves the problem. I love that story about the electrician on Christmas. A company, all the electricity went out and their factory line shut down. They called in an emergency electrician. The emergency electrician walked through the place, found a door, opened the door, turned one screw, everything came back on, and then he sent an invoice for $10,000. The owner was like, well, can you give me an itemized, detailed report of this? Because that seems like a really high and unfair number. And he said to turn the screw, it was $1. $9,999 to know which screw to turn. That's the value. Understanding it at a depth of that this electrician specifically knew. So back to the Sidney Crosby thing, paying Sidney Crosby at $20 million. I'm paying him $1 to play the game. I'm paying him the other $19,999,000 to do it the way that he does it. Mm-hmm. That's the value.
To kind of flip the script too. So my brother sells equipment to like refineries and places like that.
Yeah.
And their pump went down. Now this pump ran the whole thing. This whole refinery was based on this pump. Well, it goes down. So they phone him and they're like, I don't care what it costs. Get us this pump. So he goes and gets a quote. This quote comes out like, it's a lot of money. Like, I'm not going to say it's too expensive or it's overpriced. But it's a lot of money. And so he like has this quote in his hand and he gives it to the guy and he's like, here's the price. And the guy's like, okay,
get it done.
And he's like, really? It seems like a lot of money. He's like, dude, every day that this place is down, we're losing $1 million. I don't care what that pump costs, because I am losing $1 million a day. Yes, it's worth it. Even if the pump wasn't $1 million, but even if it was, that's literally one day. I'm losing more than that. So they understood.
So ironic.
Right? They understood.
Yeah.
But some places don't. And so for that electrician, the company, for him, what does it cost to be down for the day? And how many days are you going to be down, especially on Christmas? Now, take into consideration, I would add to the fact that, yes, it was $1 to turn the screw. And there was a value to understanding which screw. I also think that there was a value because of lost time that he had booked with his family. You want me to fix your emergency and ruin my life. In a sense, not ruining your life, but really inconveniencing me and all the people that are affected by this because of your profits. Because really that's what it comes down to. It's your profits. So 10 grand? No. I don't even think that's enough. And that may sound greedy, but it's not about the money. If you want to replace what it costs me to do that service so that you can benefit, like let's look at this relationship differently here. And I feel a lot of people discredit the trades. I also think there's a lot of crappy trades people out there, but I think a lot of people discredit the trades in the value that they bring. And this is why I hate it when building owners or, project managers really whittle down the trades.
Right.
And then they demand so much out of them. And so this happened to me the other day. I put a quote in and I was like, I put a quote for what I felt, the job was worth, but it didn't sit well with me. And I'm like, there's just no way that I can be happy with this. I need it to be a certain price. So I put that price in. I'm like, I've got people working for me now. I've got extra costs. Materials are going up. Gas is going up. Like just cost of life and business is going up. I can't use my old formula. I have to adjust it. And I gave him the price and he's like, cool, when can you start? And so there's that part of me that's like, should have went more. Right? Like I obviously left money on the table.
You almost want the resistance because you do. So I had this conversation actually just before you and I popped on with another company that I'm helping. We're doing a little bit of product development and they're trying to figure out how to productize a service. And we have like 4 or 5 marketers in here and they're all at varying price points. And we're trying to package a service into one price point. And the simplest way that I was able to frame it to them, and this is where it really landed, because we were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about, well, there's too many details and da da da. No. What is it going to cost you in the absolute worst case scenario where you have to do way more work than you should? So you're doing the copywriting, you're building out the technical shit, you're going back and forth consulting with the client. There's 100 revisions that are going on. You got to design them a logo and all this other graphic stuff. And like, what is that worth? Because worst case scenario, that's what's going to happen. Now, is that worth $500 to you or is that worth $5,000 to you? Cool. It's worth $5,000. That's where we price the package. What's going to happen now when we do that is we're comfortable delivering in a worst case scenario. But we're even happier when we can solve the problems quicker and easier. And the people who see the same value in that are going to work with you. And the people who don't see the value in that shouldn't work with you, because what will happen is when you discount those prices and you only give them specific things, they're going to need those things eventually at some point. And now they're going to come back to you and nickel and dime you to death. And lower that profit margin so that you're not happy with working for them. It builds that resentment. Now you're angry at the client. You get fired. You have a bad reputation now because you were D-bag handling it, because you were resentful. And so nobody is satisfied. Yeah. So it's up to you as the person with those services to go, this is the worst case scenario, and that's what I'm going to charge. And when you try to explain that to a customer now, which you don't need to justify your prices to anybody, if they're unhappy with it, you don't have to go into a breakdown and be like, oh, well, listen, I charge this much for these hours and this much for, no, if it's not a good fit, that's cool. It's very, very simple. You don't value my time as much as I value my time, and we're not a good fit to work together. So let's not waste any more time beating a dead horse here, because I'm not going to do the work. Here's somebody I can recommend that is more in your price point and more willing to do that. And it's probably going to be somebody younger, less experienced and hungry enough that they're willing to do a discount on the work. So you have to get super clear on what that worst case scenario looks like so that you're happy when you go out and you say, I'm going to charge you $5,000 to do this thing. I guarantee you that you're going to get exactly what you need to move to the next phase of whatever this is. Right. But the same thing, like if you're building a deck or you're doing a drywall or you're putting in a kitchen, let's say you put in the kitchen and you just put in $1,500 worth of hardware on the thing, but it wasn't what the client expected. Now you got to go back and you got to eat that cost of replacing the hardware because it's outside of the quote. Now you're not making any money. So what's the worst case scenario? You got to do double of everything just in case. And now you'll be happy or happier serving. And that gives you a better reputation. And that gets you more clients. And that grows your business. And it increases your profit margins. It's a no-brainer once you actually unpack it and look at all the different ways that you can structure that offer.
Yeah. So there's been a few things that have come up lately that are pretty interesting and very relevant to what you and me have talked about. So our last episode was on the hiring process.
Yeah.
So since then, I don't know, but my entire algorithm on LinkedIn has just shot me posts about the hiring process. It's hilarious. There was a TED
listening.
Talk. I know. There was a TED Talk article that showed up from 5 years ago about hiring. And I was like, so I read it. I was like, this is an amazing article. This is basically a beautiful add-on to the episode that we had. And then I looked at the girl. She doesn't even work at TED Talk anymore. She was in New York. Now she's on to something else because that article was 5 years ago. But I'm like, I really want to talk to her. So I messaged her. I'm like hoping for a response. But I was like, this is really cool. And one of the things she said in there was there was a series of questions that she asked, because I went on about how dumb a lot of these questions are in interviews. But one of them, she said, was ask the question, what's 25 times 25?
Fuck.
Right? And in an interview, if someone asked you that, what would you do? No context, just, hey, what's 25 times 25?
I would have to pull out a calculator. Okay, Google.
Right? So what does that tell you? As an interviewer, what does that tell you about that person? It tells you they're going to find the resources to find you the answer.
Ooh.
It doesn't tell you that they don't know math. It doesn't tell you that they're dumb. It doesn't tell you that they're incompetent. Because it doesn't matter that they don't know the answer. The answer they give, even if they give you the wrong answer, it's irrelevant. Irrelevant. Because they could say, oh, it's 250.
Jeez.
Well, it's not.
Now you're willing to lie and make shit up, and that's not a good look on the company.
Okay, but let's just say
this goes deep.
200. Okay, 250, 500, and this wasn't even in the article. This was just like my own diving into this concept. 250, 500, 1,000, whatever they say. They may honestly believe, like, because 25s are such an interesting number in quarters. So you may think, oh, your automatic response is something around 250, 500, because that's the way just we divide things up without thinking too close about it. So you may say, oh, 500. And then they say, well, it's not. What is their response to that reaction that they were wrong? Do they get defensive? Do they make excuses? Do they own it? What is their response? And do they even give you a response because they don't know the answer? Because that tells you something about them too. It's such it strips everything away, and it really gives you insight into what that person does, not just under pressure, but in a situation where they may not have the answer. Do they become argumentative? Right? It's such a neat question. And I'm like, that is genius. And that article, I was like, it created so much credibility in that article. I'm like, I want to talk to the author of the article. So that's one of my goals, is to talk to the author of that article, because it's so in line with what we talked about. And I think it's the question that you and me were really searching for on that episode of what is a good question at an interview.
Yeah.
We understood why, we could see the broken process, but I didn't really have in that episode something where it's like, here's the golden ticket. Well, I found it. And it didn't come from me. It came from an article from somebody that was well written, and she had a lot of experience, and she found it. And I love it. And I want to showcase that. And that's what I think is beautiful about what we do. It's not about our information. I'm going to tell you, if I took something from Tony Robbins, here it is. If I took something from Gary Vee, if I took something from somebody that nobody knows about, I'm still going to show it off, because this isn't the Mitch and Devon show. This is about helping people and bringing the right information to them. And that's what I think is this is kind of a neat example of that.
Yeah. I'm actually just thinking about it now in terms of, like, we are very resourceful people. That's one of the things that, if there's a problem, I'm more than willing to bet I'll have it solved before you even know it's a problem when I'm working with you. I'll use this as an example. I had somebody in a Facebook group. They were looking for a website builder, but it needed to be super affordable. So I got on the phone with them, asked them a couple of questions. I knew exactly what it was they were looking for. So I was like, yeah, I can deliver on this $500. Let's make it happen. So we got tinkering around, and it turns out there was a lot of shit that had been done in the back end before I showed up that really complicated the situation. And I was completely at a loss on how to solve that problem. So a good majority of the first half of the work that I did was trying to figure out how to solve that problem. Now, in the future, if I ever have that problem again, I know exactly what to do. Did I charge the client any differently for that discovery process that I had to go through? No, because I know what value I got out of it. On top of the $500 that I earned for building out the website, I also got to learn some really cool stuff about how the back end of that specific host works, because I'd never heard of that host before. I think it was like Hexonet or something like that. And it's a really hands-off approach to domain hosting. Not that anybody knows anything about that, but they don't do anything. They don't have customer service. There's one tech guy that you got to email, and he'll get back to you at his earliest convenience. So I'm waiting 2 or 3 days to get a response here to a question that, once we had it figured out, it took him less than 20 minutes to solve. So it was just a matter of like going through that process. But what makes us different when it comes to something like that? What makes it different for us when we do something like networking? What is the characteristic or trait that we have? Again, I believe that it's a skill. It's something that we've developed. What is it that we have that somebody else doesn't have, and what's holding them back? Like the thing you said about networking, the rookie idea is meet as many people as you can and tell them what you do so that they want to buy your product. And like, I don't even talk about my product. When I meet somebody, I'm like, what's going on in your world? Where did you win? What are your wins? What are you winning at? Cool. That's awesome. Let me celebrate with you, because that puts us on the same team. And then it's like, okay, well, where are you facing challenges? Oh, I'm facing a challenge here. I'm facing a challenge here. I'm facing a challenge here. Okay. Well, based on what I've heard, the challenges you're facing, I think that this might be a good solution for it. And I don't even talk about myself. Mm-hmm. They get it, that when I say this is a solution to your problem, like, well, how do you know that? Oh, well, it's the thing that I do. I drop it and leave it. I don't do any sales. And 90% of the conversations I have like that turn into, okay, well, what would it look like if I worked with you? Oh, yeah, well, this is what I charge for this and this. And, if that's something you're interested, we could, go through the onboarding process and make that happen. But if not, cool. I already know what you do. Now, later on down the road, when I talk to somebody else who needs what you do, I trust that you have that handled, so I can put them in front of you and you're going to take care of that. And now I've delivered some value, and I didn't do anything other than connect the dots.
I find your approach interesting for a couple reasons. So one, there's these networking events people go to. It's literally like an in-person social media.
Yeah.
Whether it's a trade show or whatever you want to call it, but they're networking events. But there's people that you can see, and they're ripping, like they're hot and ready. They're going to go and they're going to meet everybody, and they're going to give them their card because everyone needs to know about them. And they go around, this is me, this is what I do. What do you do? Oh, cool. And they leave, and it's like speed dating. And there's another approach though you can do in these shows or networking events, whatever you want to call it. And you meet somebody and you learn about them, learn who they are, where they're from. You have some key questions. And instead of being so quick to tell them about yourself, think about, where do I run into a situation where somebody I know could use this? Hey, so, okay, you do this service. So Devon, you do marketing. It's really cool. I actually got some friends that own businesses, and they're always complaining about marketing. Let me hook you up. Done. Now, guess what this does? You've created a network. You've shown you have value to your network. They don't even know what you do, but they already want to be a part of it because you've just benefited them. So now they want to know what you do because they want to repay it. Because of course, if somebody was to do that to me, I would want to see, well, how can I benefit you? That's networking. That's how networking works. And that's when people benefit from networking. And the stronger network you have, in order to build a strong network, there has to be some symbiotic relationship. So if you want a strong network, you have to prove credibility. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be famous. You just have to have a work ethic. You literally have to learn how to connect with people and connect other people, because now you've put yourself in the middle as that connector, and they both appreciate that. So it's not this unthankful, people don't remember who made that connection. No, they know exactly how they made that connection. And so here's an interesting example of networking. And people just want instant gratification. They want instant results. But here's the power of networking long term. So I worked for a company. It was a supply company. And so we dealt with manufacturer reps a lot. So we go out to this event, and it's like so unwork related, but it's like your nighttime dinner. You're going out with the guys after a golf game, and the place is loud, and we're sitting around, we're eating like appies and beer. And anyway, the night was kind of coming to a wrap. I go to get the bill, and the one rep left. Now, we had a past relationship. I'd bought some product from him, but he's gone. A couple other guys dwindled away. And on the floor, there's a wallet. And the waitress comes by, and she picks up the wallet. She goes, "Oh, somebody must have left their wallet." And she pulls out the ID, and she goes, "Does anyone know this guy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do. I'm going to see him in the morning. I'll take his wallet and I'll give it to him." So I take his wallet, put it in my pocket, don't think anything of it, finish up the night. The next morning, we're all out for breakfast. He doesn't show up. And I'm like, "Oh, where is he?" And they're like, "Man, last night he lost his wallet. He's freaking out. He's just about ready to cancel his cards. He's got a black card in there that has like $100,000 limit on it from his business. And he's freaking out because he's worried he's going to lose his job if that card gets stolen. Like, he's sweating bullets." And I'm like, "Just tell him to come down for breakfast. We'll figure this out." And so he comes for breakfast, and he's just out of sorts. He's not himself, and he sits down. And I'm like, "Man, what's going on?" And he's telling me this story. He's like, I even went to the place last night. They said they didn't have it. So I reached out. I'm like, "Tell you what, how about I help you out?" And I pull the wallet and I give it to him. And he was like a little bit mad at first, but then he's like, "Man, my whole world just got so much better." And he goes, "If there's anything I can do, I want to repay it, because I'm so glad that you're the one that found this wallet." So anyway, that was like, I don't want to say like 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. So he left the company he was with. I'm no longer part of the company I was with. I moved to a completely different city, but I knew that he was in the area. So I call him up. I'm like, "Hey man, just giving you a heads up. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm here. What do you got going on?" And he's like, "This is my business. This is what I have going on." I'm like, "Cool." Kind of lose touch for a little bit. And then I get a phone call from some random person that asked me to put a bid on the biggest bid I've ever put on in my life. Guess who made the connection? He did. He said, "Phone Mitch." Then when I was talking to him, then I'm making a negotiation with this major building owner. And he goes, what do you know about him?" And I'm like, "I trust him. I really do." And he said that he'd bet his life on you. So he goes, "You guys have a pretty strong connection. We got the job." So yeah, maybe it's a convoluted, long story, but that networking was not, "Here's my card. Call me if you need anything. Oh, I know that guy." No, it's not. There was a building relationship with that network, and that network that I get to tap into on he's fed me some of the biggest contracts that I will ever see in my life going on right now because of him and because of that network. So it very easily could have been like, "Oh, I found your wallet. Here you go. Leave."
You created an experience out of it.
I created something he'll never forget. He's like, I tell that he told me the other day, he's like, "I tell that story all the time. You literally saved my job because you found my wallet." But to me, that's the power of networking. When you have people that you lose touch with, but yet when you phone them up, it's like your best friends. That's a strong network. And I think that's what we're creating.
Yeah. And this speaks to something even more deeper, which is part of like the evolution of what the Perspective podcast has become. It started with, here's some tangible tactics and strategies for you to do things to your business. You grow it, scale it, start it, whatever it is. But as we got through it all, there's always a common denominator through everything, which is personal development. Somebody's perception of self. And when we talk about these rookies that are going out to these networking events, handing out, 1,000 business cards, thinking that it's so ego driven. That's a me thing. And the problem with me is it doesn't leave any room for the other person. And the thing that your story proves, and I don't know what you call it, my strategy in terms of networking, is it's never about me. I actually try to do the least amount of work with me. I do more work on them, and then they build that trust naturally. They build that. So, I mean, I guess to answer the question a little more directly of what is different between you and me, well, you and me, we're good. We're solid in our own foundation of who we are, who we think we are, and the value we know that we bring to any situation. So we don't have to go out in search of that validation. Instead, what we do is we go and provide that validation to somebody else. We provide the value. And this is such the buzzword of value. Like somebody in one of the groups that I'm in posed the question, like, what does a consultant do besides, and then they had those like stars and rainbows, add value. It's not about adding value. It's about you're too close to the painting to see the masterpiece. I'm walking up to the painting and I can see what you're working on because I've been in those spaces before, or I have experience in those spaces. Now my job is to help you take a few steps back and approach it from a different angle that's going to break you out of the box that you're currently in. And that's where the value is. Now, how do I charge for something like that? Well, that's completely different. I got to base that on what the result is going to be for you. If I step in right now and I charged you $500 a month for marketing, and on that you had a $10,000 a month ad spend, and I turned your business from from $10,000 a month to $1 million a month, was it worth $500?
To them, it was.
Right? Yeah, they got a screaming deal.
Yeah.
But to me, I feel like I got taken advantage of, which is why I kind of bake in a performance-based incentive into the contracts that I set up. But on the flip side, if I helped you just make $1 million a month, do you not think that I'm worth a little bit more than $500? Right? Even if it was $5,000, it's a bit of a difference. It means a huge difference to me. $500 is groceries for 2 weeks. $5,000 is I got all my bills paid, I'm well taken care of, and I can take my family on a small little staycation. There's a huge difference in that. And which one do I feel more valued at? And which is a callback now to how do you price something? Well, worst possible case scenario, this is what happens. That's something else you got to factor in. Worst case scenario, I work for you for $500 for this month and I earn you $1 million. Maybe you give me 5% of that as an incentive. I'll still charge the $500, but I'll take the extra 5%. And that's way different of a scenario. So it does beg you to be a little bit more creative in the way that you're making these connections. And especially when you're networking with somebody, if you're networking with somebody who runs a small business or is in a startup phase, they don't have $5,000 a month to pay you. But if you can see the value in what it is that they're creating and create that performance-based incentive into it, now you can help them. I can take you from, making $1,000 a month right now to making $10,000 a month. And yeah, I'll charge you $500, but when we get to the end of the month and you made that 10,000, I hope you're comfortable paying me an additional $500 because that's what I'm asking for. So you have to be selective now in who it is that you network with, right? And this is about not the width. You're not trying to network with 1,000 people. You're trying to network with the 5 people you can help, which makes it necessary for you to go deep with that person and ask the questions and not worry about what you get out of it. Because that's inevitable.
Yep. I also think networking, this is what's benefited me in networking as well. So let's go back. Let's say you're a roofer. You go to a roofing expo and you're going to start networking. Who are you going to network with? Who's going to benefit you? Now, it's true. You want to meet a bunch of people and you want to see what's going on and get the buzz. Great. Yes, that's networking. But think about what you don't have. Think about something you may not even use. So, for example, you put on shingles. Do you know there's a ton of other methods of roofing? There's torch on, there's single ply, there's liquid membranes, there's metal, and you don't apply any of those. So does it make sense to go network with a liquid manufacturer? Some people would say no. I say yes. Find
This
out
creates
what
opportunity.
else is in there. Find out a connection. Tell them straight up, I don't do liquids, but I'd like your contact info because I run into roofing, where they want a liquid. And to still be the guy that connects them. Maybe you don't get the job, but you phone them. It's like, hey, I got a lead for you. It's out of my wheelhouse, but can you take care of it? I'd like this homeowner taken care of, or I'd like this building owner taken care of because I'd like to keep that relationship. That is strong networking. And for me, what I started doing was going to these events and I started talking to people that nobody was at their table. So for example, here's a really good one. I was at odds with a lot of the builders in my market because I didn't agree with some of the practices going on for various reasons. And so I would bring it up all the time and everyone's like just pushing me aside. So I was like, why? Why is this happening? And so I dug right down to it. And I really believe that the problem was in the building code itself. But what do you do with that? Like, I'm nobody, right? Like, I'm not involved in that world. Well, guess what? The people that did have an influence on that, the people that were looking for feedback, were at a table by themselves that nobody was there because they were boring. Not them, but what they were doing. Like, that's a boring table.
Right.
Like building code.
Nobody wants to hang out with the nerds.
Nobody wants to do it. It's unless you're like an architect or an engineer, you're sitting there. And if a builder was to go up there, all he would do is complain. Yeah. So very humdrum table. But I knew that there was a problem there. There was a disconnect. And so I sat down at the table and I started talking to them. And I said, I really see a problem with your approach. And they're like, tell us. So I laid it out on the table. I said, here's what I believe is happening. I think you're training people not to build better. I think you're training them to find loopholes. And here's why I feel that way. And both of them just sat there and they listened. And they gave me both their cards. And they said, what do you feel about us doing a presentation in your market? Done. I don't necessarily have those connections, but if that's what you want to do, and it's going to help me solve my problem, and it's going to help those people solve their problem, I'm going to find that person. Let me get back to you. So what do? I go and find the president of the Builders Association in that market. And I'm like, look, these people want to do a presentation in front of these people, and you have the platform. Are you interested? Absolutely. Now I'm connected with that person. Like, you see how, and that's the beginning of a network. Because you've went in and you've created all this buzz, you've created these connections, you've identified problems, you've identified, all of this, and you put it together.
What's 25 times 25?
I don't care. That's the other thing. I asked someone that question the other day. They're like, what's 25 times 25? And they were like, and they said something, and I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, well, what's the answer? I'm like, doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
And they're like, yes, it does. And I'm like, no, it doesn't, because I've already got what I needed to know out of this question. And it drove them crazy. And I'm like, I don't know. I said 500. That was my answer to them. And they're like, it's not. And I'm like, I know, but it doesn't matter. And it made them crazy. So I'm like, that tells me a lot about your response, that it bugs you that it was about the answer, or that to them, it was about the correct answer. For me, so now I know that about them.
Yeah. Being resourceful enough to go in search of the solution and finding the solution. One of the things that I did, a little bit of tiny background, a little bit of vulnerability here from me. When I was younger, I was not very good with the ladies. Mm-hmm. I was a bit of a nerd. I didn't fit in a lot of places. It made it really hard. But here's the thing. I was resourceful enough to know, hey, somebody knows how to be good with ladies. Let me find that and learn that. What I ended up finding was a bunch of different books. I found myself in a world that I didn't even know existed. And not that I condone this in any way, but the pickup artist community got really, really good at systemizing their approach to dating. And the book that stands out to me the most, and this may or may not cause a little bit of controversy among the viewers, but the book that I found to be the most valuable was actually The Game by Neil Strauss. And I've heard this a million times before. The top marketers, top business people, top networkers, they all say the same thing. Neil Strauss, The Game is the best book to read. And the reason is because all of the principles that come from, trying to court somebody that you're interested in, applies everywhere in your life, not just in me trying to meet a girl. Right? The goal wasn't for me to go out and find as many girls as possible. The goal was for me to qualify girls and figure out which ones fit inside of my world, which ones was I comfortable with dating, and then dating girls to figure out if they were people I wanted to spend a long-term relationship with. And so when you approach it from that angle and you look at all of the different things that you do in that space, well, you have to figure out, well, how do you talk to somebody? How do you approach them? How do you open up dialogue and conversation? And once you're in that conversation, how do you build trust and rapport with somebody in a meaningful way? I'm not saying doing this sleazy or trying to manipulate people or influence them to do things that are negative. What I'm saying is that you have a problem in your business and I know I can solve it. Well, my job now becomes, how do I get you to trust me enough to know that I can solve that so that we can do business together? And so what ends up happening is I applied so many of the things there. I just replaced girl with sales prospect, and it changed the game for me. All puns intended. and when I entered the sphere of the social game, networking became really, really simple for me. And I'm not an extrovert. I may come across as one in this conversation, but I very much value my alone time. I very much value being by myself and doing my work. I'm a creative person. I love to get into my flow state and write a song or build a website or create a logo from scratch. I love that. But I also see the value in talking to people and having relationships with people. So the introvert extrovert thing, I think, is just labels we put on things so that we can create barriers between saying like, oh, I'm an introvert, I could never do that stuff. It's actually the introverts that do better because you're actually way more equipped to do this kind of thing through your natural sense of empathy and your ability to shut up and listen. Because that's what an extrovert lacks. And it's harder for an extrovert to shut up and listen than it is for an introvert to be a little bit more outspoken and actually say something that brings or delivers some value. So when you're in those settings,
different definitions of introvert, extrovert. I think people have used it very loosely. It's funny. I had this exact discussion the other day.
Right.
And somebody was talking about introvert, extrovert. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't make someone extroverted. That doesn't make someone introverted.
Right.
That's just someone taking that term and using it as an excuse or a crutch or it's using a barrier. Because you can have people that are introverted that completely are surrounded with people every day and they do really well.
Yeah.
I've had people come into the program and they're like, they come out as introverted and everyone's like, no way. They're not introverted. They're totally extroverted. They're fun. They're loving. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not what makes someone introverted. So I think just clarifying what definition you're going off for introvert, extrovert, because I completely agree. I think there's people that use it inappropriately and say, oh, introverted people, this. Being introverted, extrovert, I think has nothing to do with creative culture. Like I have a completely different viewpoint of introvert, extrovert. As you will see when we do the the course coming up. So it's, but I agree with what you're saying in the sense of, yes, there are certain traits that allow people to be more creative because they're less distracted. And I do think that introverted people tend to have a little bit more deep processing in the moment, especially with detail-oriented things, because they are not distracted by the need to be around other people and to energize other people.
And here's how I would break it down, right? The definition of introvert and extrovert is arguable. There is something written down somewhere that is has tried to make it clear what the difference is between those two things. But my argument is, okay, you're an introvert. Now what? You still got to live. You still got to function. You still got to interact with people. Like you got to go to the grocery store and buy groceries. You know what I'm saying? You still got to go do your work at your job. So don't use the label as an excuse or a barrier between you and accomplishing your goals. Get to know that and understand, well, what's next? What do you do with that? Right. And this is the same could be said about mental health. And I don't want to go too deep into it, but as a very simple explanation, I'm depressed. Okay. Now what? What are you going to do about it? Are you okay being depressed? Are you okay being there? Well, then do something about it. And there's tons and tons of ways to solve that problem. It is not a thing that you have to live with for the rest of your life. It is a moment in time that you can work on developing skills to overcome. So yeah, you're extrovert. Okay, ADHD people. This is a big, buzz trending thing that's going on everywhere. People just finally discovering that they have, or they're self-diagnosing themselves with ADHD. Okay, yeah, ADHD. Now what? What are you going to do with that? It's a superpower, in my opinion. The fact that I can switch between task and task lightning fast and still deliver very well on that thing. So how am I going to structure my life around what could be a superpower or a limitation? So you're an introvert. It's a superpower and it could be a limitation. So how are you choosing to interpret that and use it and execute on things? Just like I said, like being an introvert doesn't necessarily make you bad at sales. In fact, I would argue makes you better at sales because you are more empathetic. You listen better. And that gives you the tools now to present something to somebody that is a good fit. So if you approach it, your sales from a systematic framework in that you ask these questions to get this answer, and then you prescribe the solution, and then leave it up to that person to make a decision, you could be a rock star at sales.
Well, that's where I take with the personal development course that we have. I take okay, here's the situation. You are naturally an introvert, or you're naturally an extrovert. Now, there's other factors here that we're going to look at. However, okay, how do we apply that now? How do we apply that with the interactions that you have with people, whether it be in your workplace, your family life, your friend circle, whatever it is? Because you can work with it. It's the same thing when, I have somebody that's very close to me that has extreme bipolar. Yet they're very successful. But what they've done is said, okay, here's something that I deal with. When it comes time, when I know that something's off, there are things I have to do. I have to not answer certain phone calls until that comes back, because I will do something that I will regret. And I'm self-aware of that. And when I'm doing really well, I know that I'm probably going to buy something that I don't want. So I have to be aware of that. And so it's always keeping yourself in check, because you know what you tend to do in that situation. So going back to depression. Oh, I have depression. Okay. You know what? There's people that live with chronic depression their entire life, and yet they still function because they've chosen to be self-aware and know how to work with it. They know that there's going to be days that they do not have the motivation to do anything. So don't use those days, and don't try to do something that's not going to jive. Let yourself recoup. Come back to when you're feeling better. That's when you're going to be super successful. There's all these things that you can roll with the punches of life. Even if we're not diagnosed with depression or bipolar, we're all stressed.
Right.
We all have daily stresses. And that doesn't matter what your bank account looks like. We have stresses of life. So how do you manage that stress? How do you deal with it? And so for somebody to be introverted or extroverted, okay, you're in a sales job. Okay, cool. How do you deal with people on a daily basis? Right? Do you feel you have to go out and be that fun, lucky go, hey, we're going to find you a car and get you in there? And it's draining for an introvert. Don't drain yourself. Take an approach that allows you to be fulfilled, that allows you to use your potential. Let the other guy where he gets his cup filled from being that super, high energy guy, let him do that.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I can see in the comments already. This has happened to me in the past. And I got a story to tell that'll just blow your mind. Yeah. What do you guys know? You guys are successful entrepreneurs. Da, 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 da. Okay, listen, just so you have a little bit of background, and if you don't believe me, you can just search this and you'll find it. I was that person. From high school, I had a really, really bad time. I was in and out of the hospital, diagnosed with all sorts of different things, put on all kinds of different drugs. And I can't even begin to explain the challenges that come along with being 14 on an extreme dose of Zoloft and not understanding why I'm in the bathroom puking my brains out, trying to figure out what's wrong with me. I've been there. And the thing is, and the reason why I can see so clearly for everybody else that there is a path out of that or away from that is because I've had to go through it to get to the other side. So no, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I didn't study this in Harvard or any of that kind of stuff. But what I do know is there are some levels of truth to the things that I share. I did a project with a group of other musicians. It's called Journal of Suicidal Artists, where we all individually made a contribution to our personal struggles into mental health and what worked, what didn't work. And always the bottom line came back down to, okay, yeah, you have this thing, but what now? What are you going to do about it? And it's easy for us to create excuses and say, well, yeah, I'm depressed, so people have to treat me differently. The reality is people have shit going on in their lives too. And so for you to expect other people to treat you special because you have some thing that you have going on is unreasonable. The only thing you really have control over is your decision and how you approach it and how you get through it or over it or beyond it so that you can become a productive member of society or whatever. But I believe that we all have an intrinsic need to help each other. And this is why whenever somebody comes to us with a problem, personal or business, otherwise, our first and natural reaction is to console or to comfort that person and then to help provide some kind of solutions. I don't care if you're a guy or a girl, that's kind of loosely the framework. Is first you got to validate that that person has those feelings and make them feel like they're still safe to have those feelings. And then you deeply desire to help those people overcome it. And so you offer advice. Well, here's what I would do, or here's what you should do this, or you should do that. At the end of the day, that intrinsic thing that you have built into you to serve or to help other people, that's the purpose. That's the meaning that you derive from the work that you do when you go out into the world to help people solve their problems. And so when we take that into the context of business, I want to help people who have started a business grow it. And I'm really good at doing that. And I have a lot of knowledge in that space. And so that's the purpose. That's my deeper meaning into why I do it. Now, does it matter on the grander scheme of things? No, I'm a speck of dust on a larger speck of dust floating amongst trillions of other specks of dust. The reality is nothing matters. We get to make that up.
It's interesting what you said about us not being like therapists or psychologists. And in a way, I almost view that as a benefit. So I had a meeting the other day, got talking about what is the program? Like, what do we do? What's the purpose of the podcast? How do we see the vision? What do we see the goals? And when it comes to our personal development program, when it comes to our, the CEO for Hire program, all these programs that we've implemented, what is the mission of each? And so we kind of went through it. But one of the things I said was, so you take somebody like Tony Robbins, kind of, on top of his industry. Do I have anything against Tony Robbins? Nope. I think he brings a ton of value. I think his messaging is really good. However, I do feel that there are people that go there that don't benefit. Now, is that because his messaging is wrong? Nope, I don't. What I feel is that there are people that go to a Tony Robbins program not ready for that.
Just to be skeptical.
Right. Well, they either go to skeptical, maybe they want to benefit, but they're not in a mindset to even benefit from somebody like Tony Robbins. How many people, and I've seen this, and I'm sure you have too, have a book on their coffee table, Dale Carnegie, Tony Robbins, or, all Jordan Peterson. And they have this book and they read that book like a Bible and they love it. And next day they're all hyped up because they found this quote. And they give it to their coworkers, their employees, whatever it is. And they can't apply a stinking thing from that book in their own life because they're hindered by their own mindset. How many people go to Grant Cardone's 10X? How many people go to a Gary Vee presentation or a Tony Robbins and they're hyped on life, man? They get out of there and they're just stoked. Monday comes and they're like, I hate my life because I don't get the feeling that I got when I was there. I can't apply anything that, Tony said. I'm never going to be where Grant is. And they start almost becoming worse off than they were when they went. There is a gap between people that want to invest in themselves and want to have a sense of personal development and going to those programs and being part of it. And that's where I see the value that we bring to the table. You know what? When I use terms like introvert, extrovert, no, I don't have a degree with those terms. When it comes to mindset development, no, I don't have an experience like Tony Robbins. However, I do know that I have a credibility and a track record to get people out of kind of a stuck mindset, to expose them to that industry, to expose them to being self-aware, where they can now meditate on that. They can now start applying those little, pieces of advice. So now when they go into those programs, like, I feel like we should get paid from guys like Tony Robbins for preparing people to benefit from their program. That's how I feel. So no, I'm not in that position. So for somebody to say, oh, you guys aren't therapists, you know what? I don't want to be a therapist. I don't agree. Personally, I don't agree with therapy because I think it's a very structured, old school way of approaching things and problems. I think there's maybe some validation there, but for the most part, if you have to be in therapy for 30 years, it's not working.
That's a dependency, and that's a completely different thing. When you're dependent on somebody navigating your life for you, that's where I draw the line with therapy. I think therapy can be good in that it shows you or exposes you to certain things that can improve your life. And here's the argument that I'm going to make for anybody that's in the comments. Like, you're not qualified to talk about this stuff. I don't want you to believe me. I don't want you to do any of this stuff. Instead, what I will challenge you to do is listen to the things that we've shared and then go out in the world and try to observe them from your perspective. See what happens.
But that's creating self-awareness, even that in itself. And I think as far as our personal development program goes on, and like you'll see, like we got coming up in a few months, it's literally about creating self-awareness. Yeah. You want to get into the facts and the minutia of psychology, go down that road. I have no intention of crossing those boundaries.
There are millions of books.
Yeah, go read self-help books, and how many unqualified people write books. However, I think I see a lot of people go to these programs that are not even self-aware. How can you benefit from some advice from a Dale Carnegie book or a speaker on a stage at a TED Talk if you're not even self-aware of how you're presented yourself to the world or how you view yourself? And until you recognize that, none of that will benefit. You might feel good. You might, and I'm dealing with this right now with an individual. And, they read that Dale Carnegie book. They've read it like 17 times. Cool. And you know what? They can quote Gary Vee and acronyms and analogies, and they know all about all that stuff. But yet you sit down with that person and they play victim, or they walk out of the room halfway through during a conversation. It's like, what are you doing? Well, they're flustered. Okay. To me, there is a whole nother issue here that is irrelevant to all the fluff that you're reading, because until you have the right mindset and until you're self-aware and you're coming to the table prepared, it literally is fluff because there's no value to it.
This is but syndrome. I had a conversation with somebody. I sat in my studio and we were this was for a different thing that I'm working on, Alpha Project. And we were talking about, how healthy masculinity is necessary in the world and all this other stuff. And as I was introducing him to ideas that I know for a fact will help him improve his quality of life, what kept happening was I would say something and be like, yeah, but. And here's the thing is, when you read these books and when you look at, or you hear somebody like me or Mitch talk about stuff like this, yeah, but is exactly your thought process. Okay, I can acknowledge that you may be right, but this is my reality. So what's happening here is you're acknowledging both, but you're choosing one. So that puts the spotlight back on you. Why are you choosing this one when this one is just as much a viable option? If I asked you a very simple and basic question, do you think there is good in the world? Yeah, but there's a lot of evil. I didn't ask you about that. Do you believe there's good in the world? Yes, simple. Do you believe there is also evil in the world? Yes. Okay, now, can you acknowledge that you have a choice to be good or be evil? Yes. Okay, so let's take that same principle now and apply it to anything that we've talked about. Can you acknowledge that being a little bit self-aware in the way that you conduct yourself in business is beneficial, right? Yeah, I can argue that it can. Can you acknowledge that not being self-aware can also be beneficial? And I'll use, and this might be a little bit far-fetched here, but just for the sake of the illustration, Donald Trump. Do you think it even occurred to Donald Trump that he's an idiot at any point in his career? Or is he just ignorant to the fact and he continues to progress in spite of that?
No, I don't think he views himself as an idiot, because if he did, it would hold him back.
Right.
From
and there are millions
goals.
Of people that will disagree with that and say that Donald Trump is an idiot. So that's the point that I'm illustrating here is you can acknowledge that both exist, but in doing so, you also have to acknowledge that you get to choose. So my question now becomes, why are you choosing the one that's not serving you?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you going to break that? You're going to go out into the world. You're going to observe some of the stuff that we've shared with you and just see if it applies. Just see if some of the stuff we've shared with you helps. And if it does, cool. Do something with it. That's the challenge now. Can you do something with what we've shared with you? And is it going to improve your quality of life?
I also recognize that people, well, this is part of the program too, is making people self-aware of how they process information, how they react to new information. That in itself is telling. So, but if you take new information and you don't want it, you like the concept of learning new information, but you don't actually want to change based on something new, a new understanding, there's no point. There's no point in it. However, I do also acknowledge that there are different learning styles. As you and me both know, school was not a learning style for me. There's others. Some people do really well. That's fine. But being self-aware of how you learn information. This is why I also feel that people like Tony Robbins, he has a certain presentation to himself. He's a big guy, strong, jawline, like he's powerful voice, very, very upfront and blunt. Do I think that works for everybody? No, I don't. But for the people it does work for, he does well with. Should he accommodate every single person that comes into his program? No, because then he wouldn't be him. Gary Vee acknowledges he's very raw, right? He's not going to dance around and make people feel good. He's going to call it like he sees it. Does that agree with everyone? No, it does not. So understanding how you process information, understanding how you need to learn, don't go to those people. For me personally, I'm not a Grant Cardone guy. I have nothing against what he does. And I think he brings a ton of value and advice to people trying to grow. But his style and how he brings forward, it just doesn't jive with me. And I know that. So I'm not going to sit there. I'm not going to sit there and fill my screen with Grant Cardone because it wouldn't benefit me. Right? Brad Lee, I'm kind of on the fence. Some days I'm not in a mood to listen to Brad Lee. Some days I'm like, that's exactly what I need. But that's about being self-aware. So I find that there's this balance. But some people, it's like, no, I don't need this because I listen. Tony Robbins said this. Well, that's super cool. But is that even relevant to your situation, or you found something that didn't make you comfortable and so you left? And so to me, the program that we have, yes, it's under personal development, but that program itself, like it should almost be relabeled into just being self-aware. And the starting, the 101 of self-awareness. Yeah. Maybe we will. Maybe after this, we will relabel it because really that's what it is. We just rebranded in front of everybody. So I do feel that, yeah, people are quick to comment, but if somebody comments negatively about anything that we just talked about, as far as the personal development part of it, they took it out of context and they're just looking for an argument and they're not going to get a reaction from me because I just told you that is people go their whole life. Personal development doesn't stop. So to say that, your one presentation, your one module that you do, there's a fault to it or it's incomplete. Absolutely it is. Because how many theories, how many people in that industry agree with each other? This was always my point in the construction world. I'm like, go put a bunch of engineers together and get them to agree on something. Oh, you can't. You can't. Get a bunch in the building science world right now. We're going through this huge transition in the world of different building styles. Get a bunch of building science guys, consultants together and get them to agree on something. You can't. And that's fundamental science. This is how a wall assembly works. And they cannot agree on the benefits of it because there's different perspectives, there's different viewpoints, and there's different benefits and all these factors that come into it. But are any of them wrong? Not necessarily. It's about application. So for each individual, is Tony Robbins wrong on anything he says?
Probably.
But no, I don't think he is.
That's on the application. The argument. There's this picture floating around of these two guys, these two characters, and they're both looking down at the ground at like a diagram that's been drawn there. And it's a 6 or it's a 9. And one guy's like, it's a 6. And the other guy, it's a 9. And it's like, it's both, guys. But that doesn't happen until you take a step back and you look at all of the things and you can see it from a different perspective. And I think that that's the whole point of this podcast, is to challenge your perspective, and not that you can open your eyes to opportunities or whatever around you. But the reality is, can Tony Robbins be wrong? Maybe for somebody
in the
Maybe.
audience, it could be split.
Yeah.
6 and 9. I think that's a great analogy. And I think because everyone knows he's a great one to pick on there, but I do feel that for us, it's like, let's really try to have a couple different perspectives. That's why some of the guests I think we have on are so beautiful. And that's why I'm always on the search for a different perspective. I've reached out to a few people that I'm really hoping come on the show because what they post doesn't always sit well with me. But I don't want to bring them on the show to harp on them. I really want to get their side of it because they're not wrong in what they say. But I do disagree with some of their approaches. And I think it's worth a cool conversation to have without being an argumentative conversation, or without, thinking a podcast is only successful if there's so much conflict. There's a podcast right now, and the name eludes me, but basically they've got like millions of followers. Their view count is over millions on each view. But he just says such controversial black and white statements about guys and girls. And
is that the group where they bring the girls in and it's like a big, I love those guys.
So, and some people are really drawn to that because a lot of it is entertaining, but if you break it down, the information itself, if you put it into a different tone or text, the value to that conversation is extremely high, but less entertaining. And I think a lot of people watch it just for, the combat between the guys and girls, but I think that devalues the whole thing. So right. I do think that, the audience we're trying to reach, the guests that I want on, it's not about arguing or combating. It's about having a mature conversation. And I think that maturity kind of disappears with some of the entertainment part of podcasting. That's why I think Joe Rogan does so well. There's no drama on Joe Rogan. No matter who he has on, there's no drama.
No, he just asks questions because he's genuinely curious to understand it from a different perspective.
He's a good interviewer.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan knows the questions to ask. That's what makes it so powerful. Another interviewer that I really respect, and it's not a show that's on anymore, but it was on, it was a Canadian show on CBC, and it was by
Elvis Costello.
No, Elvis Costello.
Oh, yeah.
And he interviewed artists. And what I really respected about that was he's not this famous interviewer, but he asked questions that anyone that comes from the music world and gets the opportunity to listen to an interview with Sting, man, he asked that guy questions that I was like, those are the questions I want to know. That is super cool. They're not these, typical interview questions that are scripted, like when you interview the Kardashians, that you have to ask these 10 questions. That's what a useless interview. But he came up with questions that got right down to things that people are really interested in when it comes to people that follow Sting and the Police. So that's where I'm like, that's what I want to be. That's the goal for me in this podcast, is to ask the right questions and to ask questions that are relevant, not popular. You can't bring a guest on and expect value out of it if you don't ask the right questions.
Right. But you got to be in pursuit of finding truth, finding right. And I love this. I don't want to be right. I want to find right. So if I approach everything from a perspective of, well, I'm right, and now I got to tell you that you're wrong, right? Which is most of those hate comments in there is like, well, I'm right, and I'm going to correct you. Then why are you listening? You're just listening to correct all these people. Like, why are you spending your time doing that? Why don't you make your own podcast and correct it on your own podcast? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But if you come and you listen and you watch this from the perspective of, okay, I have a ton of knowledge. I'm a very, very intelligent person, and I'm resourceful, problem solver, all that stuff. Then you're here for a good reason. And so the question now becomes, you're not in pursuit of being right. You're in pursuit of finding right. Because what if we said something that expanded on that knowledge? Right? Yeah, that one guy was right about there are friends and family that you can hire into the company that are worth $100,000 a year. Sure, you're not wrong, but I would challenge it myself and say, are they qualified? Do they want that job? Because it's not just about me giving you $100,000 a year for you to be here in the company. There's a task that needs to be done. I need somebody to do this specific task. And if you can't do that task, you're not qualified. If you don't want to do it, you're not qualified. So this isn't about him being right
totally
or me being right.
It's so out of context from the original post.
Right.
The conversation took a totally different turn. That's where I'm like, I want to make sure that everything we bring to the table is in context.
Yeah.
Because that's important. How many times do we take an initial reaction? We made The other post I made when we talked with Jen about haters, what do? It's a reactive comment.
Yeah.
Whereas if they actually put some thought into it, you would have a lot less trolls are irrelevant, but you would have a lot less people making kind of ridiculous comments on something when they didn't actually put a lot of thought into it. They took one thing and then they reacted to it. Stop being reactive in your comments.
It's and this is the risk we take as content creators, right? And any other business that enters this space. And you have to understand this from a top-down perspective. We just had a 2-hour long conversation. And there is enough context in that 2-hour long conversation for you to understand the point that we're trying to make, or the several points that we're trying to make. But if I only took that one thing, like the comment about depression, okay, you're depressed, but now what? And you take that as a 1-minute video clip and you put that on the internet. You know how many people are going to go on there and be like, this is a disease and da 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 da, and they're going to say all this shit, and it's completely out of context for the placement of the conversation that we were having. Now, the cool part is, we can invite them to watch the whole podcast so they can put it into context, which they probably won't because they're not the right audience. Or we're going to be able to create the conversation and become the water cooler that we're meant to be, where people gather to have more in-depth conversations about that specific topic. So when we look at this from a 2-hour long conversation, we piece it down into a 1-minute clip. That's a risk we take, but we take that risk full well knowing what the benefit of that is, which is we build a community of people around us that we can serve.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're doing this for your business, that's the thing that you have to keep in mind is you're creating conversations, and don't be afraid to be in those conversations, but approach those conversations from that perspective rather than being defensive and having to defend your point. You don't have to defend your point.
Yeah.
Right. You have to help put it in a context.
Yeah. And it has to be in a situation where it's actually beneficial to the conversation. It's not about just bringing your point to the table. I got opinions all day long.
Yeah.
But it has to be in context, and it has to be a benefit in addition to the conversation. So for me, and I think something that I wanted to get out there today too, is we're always on search for guests. Like I am constantly looking through content on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook when I have to. And I want to find people that can do that. I want to find people that bring a new perspective. I want to find people that have something that they want to share. And it's not just about, oh, here's my story, woe is me. No, people that are showing that they want to benefit people, that they want to use that story. And I think we've done a really good job of finding those people, and those people finding us as well. But that is the goal right now. I want more guests, and less, in a sense, less niched. When we first started this journey, we were looking for guests specifically that were only entrepreneurs, that only had some kind of crazy backstory, or someone that was extremely opinionated. And I think now, I don't care if you're not an entrepreneur. I don't care what your situation is. What are you bringing to the table? What are you sharing? So when I see your LinkedIn or your social media, is this something? Is there a message that could benefit the audience that we're trying to approach? Because you look at a lot of keynote speakers, you go to these conferences, they're in a completely different industry, or they're completely irrelevant to, but what they're sharing is actually extremely relevant. I've also been to conferences where they bring someone that I'm like, why did we just spend 45 minutes? And I'm sure you dropped thousands of dollars on this person that's completely useless. But a lot of them, the story and the message they share is so accurate. So I think for us, the guests we're looking for is less niche now and more about what benefit can it bring the audience that we're trying to target. We're literally trying to target business owners and people in the entrepreneur mindset and entrepreneur world, people in management that are, trying to be leaders in their industry. How can we benefit them? There are people that they will benefit from that are not in the same boat, but who cares? So for me, this is a message. This is a call to action. If you feel that you could benefit that group of people, I want you on the show. And I want to pick your brain, and I want to see how you have brought value to yourself, to others, and how you could bring value to other people. And I want you in the flipping network, because this has been a huge power, not just for us, but for everyone on the show, is the power of networking. And that kind of goes back to, the first part of this recording. So that's my call to action for this one, is I am on the search for guests. You don't have to have 1 million followers. I don't care if you have 2 followers. Do you have something that can bring value to the audience? That's all I care about.
Yeah. And how can we connect that to those people so that we can continue to serve and develop that community more meaningfully? I guess in closing, this would be a perfect place to leave this. If this show has brought any value to you, share it with somebody, leave a comment or let us know what we're doing is good so that we can keep doing more of that. If there's other things that you want to add to this conversation that we haven't yet talked about, we'd love to put that into another episode. If you need help from us in any way, theperspectivepodcast.ca, you can check that out. There's tons of stuff there that'll kind of point you in the right direction. And I guess for now, that's it for this episode. We'll see you in the next one.